For centuries, war meant soldiers, cannons, borders crossed violently, and flags planted defiantly. But Britain eventually learned conflict could be waged without troops ever moving. It discovered money could freeze nations faster than armies could invade. And silence could enforce obedience more efficiently than explosions ever managed. The concept of sanction was not born in diplomacy, but in banking corridors quietly. Financial systems revealed vulnerability governments rarely acknowledged publicly. Money flows depended on access, trust, and settlement. Remove access, and economies suffocated without visible destruction. Britain's financial institutions sat at crucial junctions of global capital movement. Payments cleared through London, contracts governed by English law, reserves stored under British influence. This positioning gave Britain unseen leverage over nations participating in global commerce. Influence came not from ownership, but from intermediation. Early examples appeared subtle, almost accidental, disguised as regulatory decisions or compliance issues. Accounts delayed, transactions scrutinized, payments frozen pending review. Nothing aggressive occurred, yet consequences multiplied rapidly. Trade stalled, imports stopped, currencies weakened. Governments facing these freezes struggled to explain sudden economic paralysis domestically. No bombs fell, no borders closed, yet shelves emptied and industries halted. Blame shifted confusingly between banks, markets, and foreign conspiracies. Britain remained officially neutral. Sanctions worked because modern economies rely on constant liquidity circulation. Factories require payments, energy imports require settlement, wages require banking access. Interrupt flows briefly, and confidence collapses immediately. Britain learned disruption mattered more than duration. Unlike military action, financial sanctions carried plausible deniability. They were framed as legal compliance, risk management, or regulatory necessity. Banks enforced them without political declarations. Silence shielded accountability. London's role as clearing centre amplified this power dramatically. Even foreign-to-foreign transactions often passed through British systems indirectly. Cutting access meant isolation from global trade networks entirely. Exclusion became punishment. Britain did not act alone. Allies followed once systems aligned, but Britain's infrastructure enabled coordination before consensus existed. Sanctions spread through systems, not speeches. Finance moved faster than diplomacy. Countries targeted by quiet sanctions experienced capital flight almost immediately. Investors panicked at perceived instability, accelerating economic damage internally. Currency depreciation followed, increasing import costs and inflation. Pain escalated without visible aggressor. The brilliance lay in reversibility. Sanctions could be lifted quietly, restoring access without admitting wrongdoing. Compliance rewarded, resistance punished silently, behavior changed without treaties. Domestic populations rarely understood the cause of hardship clearly. Governments blamed mismanagement or global conditions. Public anger turned inward. Britain avoided retaliation. Energy supplies became a powerful pressure point. Payments blocked meant fuel deliveries delayed or cancelled. Electricity faltered, transportation slowed, industries paused. Sanctions felt immediate. Unlike bombs, sanctions targeted systems, not cities. Infrastructure remained intact but unusable. This preserved assets for future reintegration. Britain planned beyond conflict. Financial isolation also restricted borrowing ability drastically. Debt refinancing failed, reserves depleted, and credit ratings collapsed. Nations spiraled without firing shots. Britain mastered escalation without violence. These sanctions rarely appeared as single decisive actions. They accumulated through layers of compliance and caution. Banks avoided risk proactively. Fear enforced discipline. The global nature of modern finance ensured isolation cascaded rapidly. One blocked channel triggered others automatically. Systems reinforced exclusion independently. Britain relied on automation. International institutions followed rules Britain helped design. Access depended on standards London influenced historically. Legal frameworks legitimized exclusion. Power hid inside policy. Sanctions reshaped geopolitics quietly. States reconsidered alliances, policies, and behavior under financial pressure. Military strength proved irrelevant without monetary access. Britain redefined leverage. Critics accused Britain of economic warfare, but evidence remained diffuse. Responsibility scattered across institutions. No declaration existed. Silence protected strategy. This form of power required patience, coordination, and deep institutional trust. Britain possessed all three. Its empire evolved from territorial to systemic. Sanctions replaced sieges. As globalization deepened, vulnerability increased rather than decreased. Interdependence meant dependence on shared systems. Britain sat at key nodes. Nodes meant control. By the time nations recognized sanctions as warfare, damage was already done. Reversing integration proved impossible quickly. Economic pain reshaped politics internally. Britain rarely needed escalation. The quiet sanction became Britain's most effective modern weapon, invisible, deniable, and devastating. No battlefield existed, yet outcomes were decisive, and once unleashed, this weapon changed how power operated globally forever. Wars no longer required invasion, they required access. Britain understood this before anyone else. As sanctions matured, Britain refined them into instruments of precision rather than blunt economic punishment. Access was restricted selectively, targeting sectors capable of influencing political behavior fastest internally. Banks felt pressure first, followed by energy firms, exporters, and state-owned enterprises. Sanctions mapped power inside nations, striking nerves rather than bodies. Financial institutions responded conservatively, often exceeding official restrictions to avoid reputational damage entirely. This overcompliance amplified impact without additional policy decisions required publicly. Fear multiplied enforcement automatically. Britain relied on caution. Clearing systems became choke points where transactions quietly stalled under compliance review indefinitely. Payments were delayed just long enough to destabilize confidence without inviting immediate retaliation. Markets reacted violently to uncertainty. Silence magnified damage. Corporations withdrew voluntarily, unwilling to risk entanglement with restricted jurisdictions. Insurance vanished, shipping avoided ports, contracts dissolved quietly. Isolation cascaded faster than policymakers anticipated. Britain watched systems enforce obedience autonomously. Currency markets punished targeted nations relentlessly as capital fled perceived risk environments. Depreciation increased inflation, eroding household purchasing power rapidly. Public anger intensified, pressure turned inward. Governments struggled to respond because no single enemy could be confronted directly. There was no battlefield, no declaration, no clear demand. Diplomacy lacked leverage against systems. Britain's advantage endured. Sanctions reshaped global alliances as states recalibrated exposure to avoid similar vulnerability. Financial neutrality became strategic priority. Yet true independence proved impossible. Networks bound everyone. Britain coordinated quietly with partners by aligning standards rather than issuing commands. Shared rules ensured enforcement without visible coalition building. Consensus emerged through infrastructure. Power felt natural. Energy and commodity settlements revealed sanctions' full potential during geopolitical crises. Blocked payments halted supply chains instantly, even without formal embargoes. Price spikes destabilized domestic politics. Britain leveraged settlement. Technology intensified sanctions by embedding compliance into automated systems and algorithms. Transactions failed silently without explanation. Appeals disappeared into bureaucracy. Automation enforced policy. Targeted nations attempted building alternative systems. But trust could not be manufactured quickly. Liquidity remained thin, costs soared, and participation dwindled. Parallel networks struggled. Britain anticipated this. Global institutions referenced standards Britain helped establish decades earlier. Compliance became prerequisite for participation. Exclusion appeared procedural, not punitive. Legitimacy masked power. As sanctions proliferated, global finance adapted by compartmentalizing risk geographically. Certain regions became untouchable, others privileged. Capital routes narrowed. Britain curated flows. Domestic elites in sanctioned countries faced personal consequences as assets froze abroad. Pressure fragmented ruling coalitions internally. Policy shifts followed quietly. Sanctions succeeded. Britain's genius lay in reversibility and ambiguity. Access could be restored without ceremony once behavior aligned. Rewards followed compliance. Lessons spread. The world learned modern power operated through permissions rather than force. Access replaced territory as the primary strategic objective. Systems mattered more than soldiers. Britain mastered systems. Sanctions altered how nations planned defense, trade, and diplomacy fundamentally. Financial resilience became national security priority. Yet complete insulation proved fantasy. Dependence remained. Critics warned such power eroded trust in global systems long term. Weaponized finance risked fragmentation. Britain calculated benefits outweighed risks. Stability followed dominance. History may judge this era, not by wars fought, but by accounts frozen. Conflict moved from front lines to databases. Control became quiet. Britain adapted fastest. The quiet sanction endures because it aligns with modern complexity. It requires no spectacle, only compliance. Its victims struggle to respond. Its architects remain unseen. In this world, sovereignty depends on access, not independence. Economic survival hinges on remaining connected. Britain designed the gate, and it still holds the keys. If this story changed how you see modern power, remember, silence can be more dangerous than war. Subscribe for more untold histories of money and control, because the next conflict may never be announced.